All right. Whoop. I'm already messing with the cameras, everyone. Okay. I do believe we are live. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another Sunday morning live stream. If you guys can let me know in the chat that you can hear me, what's happening, Ed? Thanks for tuning in, 10 mil. Hey, we got Sky Tortoise Ferryman in the chat. Hey, what's happening, Tony? It's good to see you guys. All right. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking in really big detail about the live set that I've just put together and put out for the online music festival, Clownfest 5. And the reason why I want to do this in this kind of detail is I find that this kind of content specifically is very much lacking from a lot of the other YouTubers and a lot of the other big channels. People post jams and stuff pretty much on a daily basis on YouTube, right? If you're following any YouTubers at all, you're probably getting jams in your feed all of the time, right? But how many of these YouTubers actually take the time to break down how they built these jams, how they set it up, why they made the decisions they made while building the jam, how the jam works, and all those kind of details that we can learn from as well. So that's really what I want to do today, is to be able to explain all of the details, some of the anomalies I had along the way in building this set also. I'm running out of breath already. Let me grab a drink of water, and thanks for your patience, everyone. Whew. It's really difficult to have an actual solid breath with a mic right on your face, because if I breathe at all, I'm like Darth Vader, you know? So just give me a second to catch my breath here. All right, well, happy birthday, man. Right on. Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna, I think, start over here with this section of the jam, which is sort of how the jam played out as well. And I want to start, actually, before we get into the meat of it here, I really want to stress that a room full of gear like this is not at all necessary or a requirement for creating music or creating live jams. I would say you have three options for if you want to be able to make music and make live jams and stuff like that. You've got the hardware route, which is a lot, a lot of investment, and can get pretty difficult. You've got the computer route, and like something like a DAW like Ableton Live and some Midi controllers, which you can get a lot done with a system like that. Or also even just an iPad and some Midi controllers, and you can build music and build live jams that way as well. In no way do you need a room full of gear or an investment like this to be able to do these kind of things. I'm a sound designer for a living. I don't really have any other hobbies, and this is kind of what I'm about. So I, already have a room full of gear to build these kind of things with. But you definitely, this is not the price of entry, if you get my drift. Whew. Okay. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, let's talk about the individual pieces of gear that are out right now. This is actually two completely separate jams that are set up here, and they're not connected to each other. And I want to talk about that aspect of this as well today. Let's start off with this piece over here. This is the Akai MPC Live, and this is a full-on production station. I can build complete tracks in this box alone. This is the Access Virus Darkstar synthesizer. I consider this like my most professional sounding synthesizer, like my big, go-to synth in the studio, the Access Virus Darkstar. This is the Medusa from Polyend. It's a synthesizer as well. It's a mono synthesizer, and that actually comes into play in how I made some of the decisions to set up this live jam as well. Next to that, we have a delay pedal up here on the top shelf. This is the Eventide Rose delay pedal. Fantastic delay pedal, and it's also mono only. Not only, or well, we're going to get into that later. But Underneath that, we have an Electron Digitact, which is a sampling drum box and drum machine and groove box. Next to that, we have a DJ mixer. This is the Allen and Heath Zone DB2 mixer. I really love this mixer. Down beneath that, we have a really old piece of gear. This is the Yamaha SU700 vintage sampling groove box and drum machine and sort of song creation tool from the 1990s. Next to that, we have the Roland MC707, which is a full basically DAW in a box. It's got 8 tracks. They can be either drum machines or synthesizers. Really robust box. Next to that, we've got the iPad. This is just an older iPad Air 2, and I'm running the Beatmaker 3 app. Those of you who are familiar with my channel at all know that I'm really about the Beatmaker 3 app on the iPad. Up here on the top shelf, starting from this side, we have a Roland TR8S, which is a drum machine that can also import samples. You guys are going to hear that a lot from me about boxes that I work with that can import my own sounds and my own samples. As a sample maker, using samples is a really big part of my workflow. Next to that, we have the Erica Synths Acid Box 3 filter, which is a stereo hardware filter, not just mono. And then next to that, we have the new Novation Circuit Tracks, which is basically the same as a lot of these other machines here. It's a drum machine, it's a groove box. You can load your own samples. It's got synthesizers inside it as well. Let me see here. Ooh, I'm having trouble catching my breath this morning. I also want to stress that I really want you guys to be able to be free to ask questions in the stream or make comments in the stream, whether they be about the components that I'm talking about here or just music production in general. I really want these Sunday live streams to be a really casual hangout where we can all just kind of relax and hang out and talk about synths and stuff. Okay, let's see here. One of the things that I think is really, really important about building setups like this, and one of the first things that I personally wanted to think about when putting this together, is loading times. Now, if you've seen the set, or if you haven't seen the set, it'll be on my channel a couple of days ago, Clownfest 5 live set. But if you've seen the set, I go for about 20 minutes, and I move from this station over here, and then towards the end, I kind of move over to the modular system. And at no time during that set is there any pausing while I'm, loading the next track into the pieces of gear or whatnot. And that's definitely a very large benefit to using multiple pieces of gear, is that you can kind of set up, a jam with one amount of gear and another jam with another amount of gear, and those can operate completely independently of each other so that there's no loading times. I find that the less amount of gear I'm actually using, the more likely there is going to be that need to pause and then load the next project. For example, when I started doing this kind of thing in the 90s, I was part of an electronic music duo, and we had, at the height of that project, 17 pieces of gear that were all interconnected together to make the tracks. And we did our first sort of practice concert in our home, where we just invited a bunch of friends over and did about an hour and a half show. But it was such a robust amount of gear that between every single song, there was about a 2-minute pause while we would have to use floppy disks and load different, sessions into the different gear. We had 2 different mixers. I had tons and tons of notes, and between the songs, I would run over to one mixer and make all these different settings. My friend would run over to some other gear and make a whole bunch of different settings. We would just kind of put a monitor up in the corner and play a movie on that monitor. So anybody who was hanging out would just sort of watch the movie in between these different songs that we were loading up and then making all these changes for, right? That's really not a great workflow, but it sort of helped start me on this sort of journey of thinking about using the gear together in more beneficial ways, per se. And a few years later into that project, we sort of divided the gear into two sections, to where I had a section of gear and my friend had a section of gear. And I would sort of run a track while he was loading and preparing the next track in his set of gear. And then when we would finish the track that I was sort of running, he would sort of go. And then I would sort of start loading my next session as well. And that sort of workflow gets to be a real pain in the butt. So if you've got, a room full of gear, being able to figure out the ways that you can just use it together without having to do any loading for a set like this is super awesome. I'm just going to check in with the chat super fast and make sure that I'm not missing any awesome questions right off the jump. Okay. Hey, what's happening, Sean? Thanks for tuning in. Hey, we got Jade Starr in the chat. Thanks for tuning in, Jade. All right, good to see you here. Okay. All right, guys. Now, let's see here. There's so many things to talk about this set, and that's really what I want to do, is talk about the details and the thinking process behind the creation of this type of thing, because that's really what I feel that, YouTube is really lacking in that kind of content. One of the things that I like to do in my live jams is I really like to try to stay on the grid. When you're producing a track in, say, a DAW on the computer like Ableton Live, or maybe a DAW on the iPad like Beatmaker 3, you're really working in these sections of like 4 bars, 8 bars, 16 bars, etc. And when I'm doing a live jam, I really want my audiences to feel that same sort of flow like when they're listening to professionally produced music from a DAW. So the first thing that I try to do is establish a way for me to stay on the grid. Whew. I don't know why I'm so out of breath today. Forgive me, everyone. Just can't seem to catch my breath. I'm trying to talk slow, but there's a lot to cover. So what I did was I thought about how I was going to establish sort of a crash impact sound and then a riser sound that would build back up into that crash sound. And what does that mean? That means by default, the very first thing that I'm considering and starting to look at is ebb and flow, and starting to work with the pieces right from the very beginning that are going to help that momentum and going to help things push forward and help things kind of pull back a little bit as well. Now, a lot of these boxes have their own sequencers inside of them, but most of these boxes have a limitation of making patterns that are only 8 bars long. Now, when I want to put an impact sound on the downbeat, I don't necessarily want that to come in just every 8 bars for 20 minutes, right? That's going to get a little bit overwhelming with the whole forward momentum idea. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to change that concept into a 16-bar loop so that my sections of sort of ebbs and flows would be 16-bar sections instead of 8-bar sections. Now, to do something like that with the MC707, it's a no-go because there's only 8-bar patterns. To do something like that with the Roland TR-8S, that's a no-go because you've only got a maximum of 8-bar patterns. To do something like that with the Circuit Tracks is absolutely a no-go because you've only got patterns that go up to 8 bars. You can see this limitation start to come up in a lot of boxes, right? That 8-bar pattern limitation. And even some of the newer boxes, we're going to come into that 4-bar pattern limitation. So what are we to do if I really want to set up a 16-bar loop that happens every time without me having to deal with it, right? Well, I started with the Akai MPC Live because this can set up loops of any length, from 8 bars to 100 bars, you know. And so, my breath today, Apologies. But I feel it's better that I stop and take a breath than just, speak short breathed the whole time. So I went ahead and set that up very first thing for the very first jam that I was building. I put an impact sound into the Akai MPC Live, and then I put a riser sound into there as well, so that the whole time that the first jam is going, that's just sort of happening in the background without me having to think about it. And what that does is it gives me cues to stay on the grid and to know when in time to change my patterns. And even if you get pretty nervous while you're doing these jams sometimes, and so if I lose count or whatever, I just kind of focus on the music and I wait for that riser sound to come in and sort of just lead me into that next section and know when to make these changes. This is a really important part of my workflow, the riser and the impact sounds. Now, there's what the impact sound sounds like. I pretty much have used that same impact sound in every track I've made for about the last 5 or 6 years. But when you find a sound that does what you need it to do, just use that sound, right? And then next to that, I've got a riser sound, which takes 16 bars to go through. I've just hit that pad. I'm pretty sure I put it on there. If we wait just a minute, I'm pretty sure we'll hear that riser come in. It might not be on that pad. Doesn't matter, because we're going to go through all the sounds now in just a moment as I explain how this one is actually set up. Because what I've done is I started building the jam with the circuit tracks, okay, the new circuit groove box, and I'm going to be making a whole lot of packs of drum sounds for this. So the drums in the circuit right now are currently the drums from my very first circuit drum bank, which is coming out hopefully soon. And let's see here. It's a little bit difficult for me to figure out exactly how to show you guys these parts. But what I did was the majority of the one-shot type of beats and drums are being programmed from the circuit tracks using the drum sounds that I've put in the circuit tracks. But I also wanted to use a whole bunch more other sounds for this first jam. It's the jam with the vocal samples.
Now, also, if you pay attention.
Okay, so it's that sort of drum and bass, dubby sort of jam. And what I've done is I've taken the circuit tracks as one of its new features over the original circuit. Is it has 2 dedicated MIDI tracks now that we can use without giving up any of the 4 drum tracks or giving up either of the 2 internal synthesizer tracks. So what I've done is I've taken, let me see if I can actually move this camera closer to where we can get a better view of what I'm talking about. Forgive the jiggly camera here, please, while I try to reset this a little bit better. Okay. And sorry that the lights from the box are so blinding on the camera there. But what I've done is I've assigned lots and lots of individual samples inside of the Akai MPC Live to be triggered by the circuit tracks on the circuit tracks MIDI track. That's actually me playing an external synthesizer, which we're going to get to in just a moment. Actually, we may as well do that one first. I'm using both of the external MIDI tracks inside of the circuit tracks here. The first of the MIDI tracks is literally just playing a very simple chord stab here on the Medusa. Okay. The delay on that is coming from the Eventide Rose pedal. And the cool thing is I can, adjust the cutoff of the filter cutoff on that chord sample in real time, by tweaking the... I really like the Eventide Rose delay pedal. And this is a mono synthesizer, and this is a mono delay pedal. And the circuit tracks actually has 2 inputs on the back for running mono signals into the box itself. So I'm running the output of the Medusa and the Eventide Rose pedal back into the box here, into the circuit tracks, so that I can control the volume internally of the circuit tracks, and that it sort of groups the audio together, the drums that are coming out of the circuit tracks, as well as that chord stab. So on the next MIDI track over, actually, is now where I've assigned these sounds to the Akai MPC Live. And how I'm doing this, guys, is I've just got a MIDI out from the circuit tracks. I'm running that into a MIDI Solutions Quadra through, which is, it looks like this one here, except this one here is a Quadra merge. But basically, you just run a MIDI in to the input here, and then you can run that same MIDI signal through 4 different outputs at the same time. And so I'm using that to route the MIDI out from the circuit tracks into the other gear, into the Medusa, and also into the MPC Live over here, so we can talk to that as well. So this first sound here, I'll turn the volume on the MPC down a tiny bit, is just a string loop. And here's the first anomaly I came up against when I keep switching these cameras around. And thanks to everybody for your patience. It's going to be really just, casual today. The first anomaly I came up with is that I'm triggering these samples, rather this loop that I just played you. It holds an 8-bar loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, the anomaly here is that I would like for the circuit tracks to just hold that note down for 8 bars. Well, the circuit track doesn't hold down notes for 8 bars. The maximum gate time you can do on the circuit tracks is 2 bars. So the only way I was able to make that loop be triggerable from the circuit tracks was to make that loop play out in its entirety every single time it gets triggered, which is why you hear that full 8-bar loop happening. I don't have to hold it down. It just plays, right? So that can be a little bit frustrating, because that means that every single time we hear that loop, it's got to play out in its entirety. I can't make it a little bit shorter. Let's go further and check out some more of these samples. Here's basically a chopped version of that loop, right? So that I can just put in a little pink whenever I want. A little tiny hit of that string sound. This is a really short hi-hat loop, but you can hear that it doesn't play all the way when I hold it down, because it's really just a 4-beat loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, And so again, this looks a little confusing, okay? Because I'm not playing samples back from these circuit tracks. These samples are sitting here inside of the Akai. And I can go through the banks, but it's very difficult to show you exactly where they are, because they're kind of spread out along. There's 128 pads that you can access in one bank. So they're kind of spread out. However, the circuit tracks needed those MIDI notes to be laid out. That's where I put the samples. So there's this little hi-hat riff. That one's empty. Okay, here's it triggering my impact sound. So this is a great example how I can show you now that...
I think subconsciously people like the dubs more.
Right, so there's that vocal sample. But again, you're really hearing it from the MPC Live.
I think subconsciously people like
Right.
the dubs more.
I'm just using the MIDI sequencer of the circuit tracks to trigger those sounds. Now, why am I doing it that way? This sounds really confusing probably to people who aren't really familiar with working with hardware like this. The reason that I'm doing it that way is so that I can create, dedicated pre-built patterns inside of the circuit tracks, and then I can switch between those as necessary. And we're going to get into that in just a moment as well. Let me show you some more of these sounds that I've got in here. Goes low. Okay. If I double stop on the Akai there, it stops those samples from playing out. So, little vocal hit there. And a lot of these samples are sourced from like really old jungle sample packs from like the late 90s and the early 2000s. I spent a lot of time trying to like pull some really authentic and kind of like traditional vintagey jungle and drum and bass type of sounds out of my sample collection for this one. Just another weird little vocal glitch sample. The chop of that so I can, do back and forth. There's the vocal again.
I think subconsciously people like the dubs more.
Okay. Then we can go up again.
I think subconsciously people like the dubs more.
Okay, here's like a bass drop. Ooh, I don't know if you can hear that. If you're on your phone, you're probably not going to hear that at all. Here's that riser sound I was talking about in the beginning. Now, again, this is being triggered out of the MPC, even though I'm, touching the pads here on this circuit. There's that impact sound. There's another impact sound that I'm not sure that I actually used. Is a chop of the bass line. The main bass line was a loop, but then I chopped up all the individual sounds out of that loop and spread them across different pads here. So there's one of the bass hits so that I can program my own bass lines as well. Actually, that's the original full bass loop here, so we'll let it play out for a second. And again, it's that same anomaly that I had with the string loop. This is an 8-bar, that's why it's just playing in the background. I'm not holding it down. And every time I trigger it, it just plays those full 8 bars of the bass loop. Because again, this anomaly with the circuit tracks, it can't hold down a part for 8 bars. It can only hold that part down for 2 bars. Now, I know I've just gone through a lot of really, really deep, geeky information, and I've been ignoring the chat, so I'm going to kind of just step over here and just make sure there's no pressing questions that I need to answer real fast in the chat, hopefully. Oh, it's a really nice pedal, 10 mil, definitely. I really think, actually, between the options of their new micro pitch pedal, on which camera I'm on all of a sudden, of their new micro pitch pedal and the Rose pedal, I really think that there's something really special about the micro pitch pedal. I mean, I love them both, but if I had to pick one or the other, I might pick the micro pitch pedal. Just a tip from your Uncle Dean. Let's see here. Yeah, so circuit is the master brain. Inky, you got it exactly. Okay. All right. So let's see here. So basically, yeah. So the circuit is just triggering,
I think subconsciously
loads
people like
and
the dubs
loads
more.
of samples out of the MPC Live. One of the reasons why I love to use the MPC Live is that it loads stereo samples, and you can put up to 4 different effects on every single pad. So I can get really deep with the EQ settings on there. I can use the inbuilt effects on the MPC Live as well. And I really like having some stereo sounds in my jams and in my mixes. Unfortunately, all of the samples that we load into the circuit tracks itself is going to be 16-bit mono samples. The same is true for the Roland TR-8S, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe I am mistaken on that. Don't quote me on the TR-8S, but definitely on the circuit tracks, it's 16-bit mono. And so to be able to add some nice wide stereo samples, like wide pads and stuff, over your mono drum sounds, definitely recommended. Okay. So I basically have, let me see if I can show you with this. I'm going to keep moving this camera around a lot today. I basically have a few pre-arranged patterns inside of the circuit tracks, and I'm able to just kind of switch back and forth between those pre-programmed patterns. It's probably a little bit too bright in here, so can't really see, but Probably still can't see, but I've got some little notes at the bottom here underneath the actual projects. I go into the circuits projects section, and these are my individual, what I'm considering to be like scenes when you're working in Ableton. And that just means they're like a collection of sounds and loops. So like if I want to play scene 3, for instance, or project 3, it's going to get loud. Hopefully not too loud, sorry about that. It just sort of plays out, and if we're counting and waiting, right? Here comes that riser. 2, 3, and I can just, hit the next project over, and it will load, the next project on the next downbeat. But these I'm using, again, just like I would use a scene inside of Ableton or a scene inside of Beatmaker 3, to where it's just a collection of like pre-programmed material that's just ready to go. And I find that especially with a live jam like this one here, that I knew I needed to fill a full 20 minutes on. I really want to be able to have some fallback stuff that I know is going to, be there and happen no matter what. I certainly don't want like everything in these jams to be like reliant on happening from me in real time, because I'm likely to forget some things or make a mistake or, along the way. I definitely want to be able to have some things that I can interact with, even when the jam is sort of set up in these scenes that way. And so on this one, I've got Beatmaker 3 here on the iPad, set up with 3 of custom sounds that I've made. I've been using that one for the last couple of years in some of my live jams, actually. And I think I've given these sounds away for free in various Beatmaker 3 packs over the years. But basically, it's really, really easy to use Beatmaker 3 like this. We just, turn Beatmaker 3 into scale mode so that the notes match whatever key we're playing in. Our first jam here today is in the key of G minor. So I've got these pads set to the key of G minor, so I can't hit a wrong note is the thing. And all I need to do is just be really creative with how I'm, rhythmically playing back these melodic parts. I've got this pad here. Running through lots and lots of reverb and stuff, and this is probably my all-time favorite sound that I've created inside of Beatmaker 3, because it just sort of matches with almost any other content. Really, really awesome to use Beatmaker 3 like this. In fact, one of the neat things that I did, you guys, was I've got, I don't know if I can dig it out here, but I've got an iRig, you can't really see it back here, I've got an iRig Midi device plugged into the USB audio hub that I'm using. I'm using the Novation USB audio hub 2x4 for the audio interface for the iPad. Unfortunately, they don't make this interface anymore. You can still find them on eBay used sometimes. But one of the things I love about this interface for using with the iPad is that it has a built-in USB hub. So I've plugged the iRig Midi into the USB hub, and that is giving me the ability to send the Midi clock from the Novation circuit tracks over to Beatmaker 3, so that when I start the Midi clock on the circuit tracks, it starts the Midi clock on Beatmaker 3 as well. So any sort of like delay sounds or effects that are on these, not really much delay actually, but so that it will really, really sync up with the tempo of the whole project. So currently I've got it set up so when I press play on the Novation, whoops, I'm just trying to get to this camera, so that when I press play on the Novation circuit tracks, the other components in that first jam start going. Their sequencers start going. And that is, again, the Akai MPC Live, and that's Beatmaker 3, and there are no other sequencers that are going in that particular jam. Now, I started building some, pieces over here, and this ended up being the second jam. And I built that sort of dubby drum and bass jam, and that ended up being a separate jam that I built. I actually had a separate station out here. I had like a table out here where all those pieces of gear were kind of, being built up or whatever, but I realized that it was just getting way, way too cluttered, and I sort of moved a bunch of things around in the corner and sort of jammed both of these projects into one kind of corner area. So that first track is just using the Novation Circuit tracks, the Akai MPC Live, and Beatmaker 3. And the second jam is using all of the rest of the gear that is in this section. And for that jam specifically, that's sort of the techno sounding jam. It sounds like this here. It's going to get loud, guys. Okay, so for this jam here, it's being controlled by a few different things, actually. Nothing, it's not being set up at all in the same way that the first jam was being set up. And I really want to stress this kind of thing, that the first jam had that sort of fallback idea on it, that these are pre-built patterns, and I can sort of just change to the next pre-built pattern, and it's going to go to those exact, predetermined section of loops. And I know exactly every time when I change patterns where it's going to go and what it's going to sound like. The live sort of element of that first jam, is coming from me playing the keys, because that's going to be different every time. And there's a sort of an element of danger there if I make a mistake, for that to go wrong. And I kind of want that. I definitely, need some elements of, this could go wrong, or this could go off the rails if I make a mistake. I don't want it to be just a whole bunch of me just changing patterns and knowing what it's going to be and then not touching anything. I still want those live elements to be there. So again, for the first jam, I was able to do those vocal samples live, and the keys live, but the music itself wasn't really going to change no matter what I did, unless I sort of make a mistake and hit the wrong, scene to go into next. That first jam is kind of almost like got a safety net built into it, whereas this second jam does not in any way have that sort of a thing at all. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of these devices have their own sequencers built in. So the SU700 from Yamaha has its own sequencer built in. The Roland MC707 here has its own sequencer built in. The Roland TR8S here has its own sequencer built in. And the Electron Digitact here has its own sequencer built in. So I decided to, pick one of these boxes that I'm using for the second jam and decide that that was going to be, the master box where it's setting the tempo. And I chose the Roland TR8S to be the master here. So every time I press start or stop on the Roland TR8S, it starts the tempo going in the Roland MC707. It starts the tempo going in the Electron Digitact, and it starts the tempo going in the Yamaha SU700. Not just the tempo, but it starts those boxes actually moving forward. Now, the Yamaha SU700 is a really cool old piece of vintage gear, but it is really, really limited. And let me try to explain a little bit about what I mean by that as I thrash this camera. This is basically, think of this as, let's see, there's two loop tracks here, which you can load loops into and play back those loops, and it can like pitch stretch them or do some fun stuff there, even slice them up. Then we've got four tracks next to those loop tracks, and these are for composed loops, so I can put like one shots in here and then bang out rhythms and stuff on these four loop tracks. Over here on the right, we have 4 free tracks, which basically means that I'm not allowed to assign these to a sequencer at all. They're just free tracks. I can only use them just to tap these buttons individually. We have 4 banks of these pads, basically. So on the side here, I can choose between bank 1, 2, 3, or 4. And that's it. And what I mean by that is like the one thing we're missing workflow wise in a box like this is the ability to create like sections or different patterns. Basically, I can get sort of a groove going in this box here, and there's not really any way to switch between like, let's go to another groove or whatever. You're basically just turning tracks on and off here in this particular box. So what I've got in this box is I've got a drum loop. In fact, the drums for the second jam, the breakbeat loops and stuff, are all coming out of the Yamaha here. We've got this breakbeat loop. I could turn that off, and then I can turn another track on and play that one. This is also what I meant earlier by I spent a lot of time digging through like some really vintage sample packs. All of these drum loops here came from really old sample packs from like the late 90s and early 2000s. Hope that's not too loud. Right, so these are some pretty fat loops, and then the last beat that we've got here, I mean, just really, really fat beats, right? And I'm using, that's one thing that I knew right off the jump with this second jam, is that I wanted to be able to have enough elements in that jam that I could that I could sort of weave back and forth between the break beats and bringing in like a 4 on the floor kick drum. And so let me check the chat real fast if anyone's saying like, oh my God, it's too loud or something like that. Hey, all right. Thanks for tuning in, Connor. Hey, Chovarsi, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you being in the chat. Cool. All right. So basically, let's see here. It's difficult to sort of pinpoint and like hone in on the actual elements here, which is what I'm trying to do. But all of these boxes in the second jam are being routed through this DJ mixer here so that I can control some of the individual elements. Now, when I press play on the second jam, like I said a minute ago, it just kind of starts all the individual boxes going. And that allows me to sort of work the individual boxes in real time and sort of change which patterns are happening, but individually. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, fantastic. I've got a main level here that I can turn way down so I'm not just yelling. Let's bring that out. Okay, so once I've got this groove going, the Roland TR-8S is just a drum machine sampler, and I've just got a 1-bar pattern only that has a few different that's got a few different sounds built into it. This pattern, and then this is one of the reasons why I just love this box, is because you've got faders on the front for every single track. Any of the sounds you're using, you can just bring those in and out in real time. It's really, really fantastic for live jamming. I've got like a ride sound I can bring in and out. Got like some open hi-hats I can bring in and out. Got like a rim shot I can bring in and out. And last but not least, if you've seen the set, you know there's that giant kick in the second jam. Now, the neat thing about this is that everything is in sync, because I'm, got the Midi synced up. So on this track here, I've got the breakbeats coming out of the SU700. But because I'm running everything into the DJ mixer, I've got a nice EQ control over all the tracks. So when I want to bring that kick drum in, all I do is I bring the low frequency down on the track that has the break beats. Now, if you're on your phone, you probably didn't hear a thing happen just there. But basically, I have the lows in, and then I can take those lows out, which leaves space in the mix for me to add that big kick drum. And keep those break beats going in the background, but not interfere with that low frequency content of that really big kick drum, because I can pull the low frequency content out. It's also giving me some stuff to do in real time. Now I can bring that kick in and out, real time, right? And if I bring it out, I just bring the low frequency content back up again on the break beats. I can change the break beats and do the same thing. Bring the lows out and add that kick whenever I want. And I can bring the other tracks in and out as well. The hi-hat and the open hat and the ride cymbal, the rim shot. So, let's see here. When I press play on the main sequencer, the digitact over here starts going as well. And the digitact is doing a really, really simple feature in this jam. And this is what I spoke about in the very beginning. Having a box that can build a 16-bar pattern rather than an 8-bar pattern. And all the digitact is doing in this entire jam, let me see if I can show you guys, is it's doing, again, what I spoke of in the very beginning with the first jam, which is that impact and that riser sound that I like to use to create an ebb and a flow in these pieces of music that sort of just happens naturally. And so what I'm going to do here is we're going to go ahead and just solo the digitact. There's that impact, right? And now I'm not going to count it out because I don't really have a tempo to count to. But if we just sit here and we just patiently wait for a second, we'll hear the riser sound. That's a cymbal that's happening on the downbeat of bar 8. So keep waiting for it. Hey, Opie. Hey, buddy. Okay, so did you hear that riser come up and then we started again with that impact? That gives me the default built-in ebb and flow to these jams that I'm so desperately looking for every time. So that's the only thing that the digitact is doing in this whole jam. It's just providing a way for me to get that 16-bar loop where the impact happens every 16 bars and then that riser sound happens at the end of every 16 bars that helps us push forward into the next section of 16 bars. Something else that happens by default when I press play over here on the Roland TR-8S is not only do my other machines start going, but I've also got an arpeggio sound just being held down in the Virus Darkstar. And that happens throughout the entire second jam, from the second that I press play to the second that I press stop. The virus is being run through the Erica Synths Acid Box 3 filter so that I can, have a frequency control. I can kind of sonically carve out these frequencies in real time. There is no program changes with the synthesizer. I'm just able to just click to the next preset whenever I want to change the sound. I can kind of bring it in and out of the mix by low pass filtering it all the way down if I want it to go away for a section. Let me see if I can show you what I mean here. Okay, so here we're hearing just the break beat. And if I move this filter, I can filter in the synthesizer arpeggio. Now, I'm routing, I'm yelling here, sorry about that. I'm routing the audio of the Virus and the Acid Box right back into the SU700 so that, again, I'm doing that sort of trick that I did with the first jam. I'm running a few of the things into the other devices so that I don't need to use quite as many mixer channels as I would otherwise. I've only got 4 channels on this DJ mixer here that I'm working with, so the sound here is running back into the SU700. Let's see here. So I basically have gone through my preset collection in the Virus and just selected out lots of cool arpeggios that sort of just go with whatever I'm working with down here. It took me a lot of time going through and picking out just the right, sounds that I wanted to bring into this mix so that wherever I've, kind of gone, that we've got something that will sort of gel with that. And if it doesn't, I can kind of fade it out with the low pass filter filter or sculpt those frequencies in real time during the jam as needed. Let me just take a quick moment and check in again with the chat here and make sure I'm not missing anything super important. If I do miss your question, please feel free to ask again, because I'm sorry that I'm missing it. I'm just trying to cover a lot of information today. I think I'm a little bit all over the board too, so I apologize about that. It's difficult to kind of figure out how I want to, break all this down when there's so much information to get through. The MC707 is got its own sequencer that can allow you to set up predetermined scenes, okay, to where, again, a scene is just a collection of what sounds are playing and what patterns are playing in real time. And so I've got different scenes inside of the MC707 that I can change. Just a few sounds, I think 3 sounds total are coming out of this box. Oh, this is great. This is because I really wanted to remember to focus on this. The first sound is the bass sound. The second sound is kind of just a synthesizer sound. Now, this is want to focus on this bass sound a little bit, because if you go through and you watch the jam, in the second part of the jam, when I go into the big, techno jam over here, the bass line doesn't actually change, not one time through that entire jam. It is 100% the same. Everything else changes. The beats go in, the beats go out, the 4 on the floor kick comes in and goes out, the percussion comes in and goes out, different synthesizers, tons of different acid lines and whatnot, but the bass line stays the same that entire time and never changes. And the reason that I did that was just to keep that, thread of consistency through the whole jam, so that no matter what else I did, there would always be that underlying groove happening the entire time. And once the listener locks into that groove, you can kind of walk around the groove now and start going on side quests around that groove and taking off in different directions, but that solid line of that groove is always there because the bass line is not changing the entire time. So I've got this other synthesizer part in the MC707 that I can bring in. I've got it assigned, to where I can tweak the filter on that sound during any of the scenes that I take it to. So depending on the part of the groove that's happening, I can make it mellow or bring the cutoff up, right, and make it a little bit more sparkly up there. Do you need to go outside, Opie? Hang on just one sec, guys. All right. Sorry about that, and thanks for your patience. So, if I change to a different scene on the MC707, well, I wasn't counting on the grid, but we've just changed the pattern that the synthesizer is doing, but the bass line is still the same. I'll do it again. I've now changed the synthesizer part, and I can filter that in real time. Again, I need to give myself some things that I can do in real time with pretty much all of the different elements if I want to. And so having a immediately go-to filter cutoff on that ARP is really useful there. I've got one more sound here. And so if I fade out our arpeggio, we sort of hear this sound. Right? And we can filter that as well. Hear it getting way down there now. And I can fade in the other arpeggio over that. And no matter what is happening in the rest of the jam, it's always going to sound good. I can bring in the kick drum. Filter these sounds in real time. And then when I'm ready to change the pattern, I have a few options. When I want to change things up, I can either change the melodic part that's coming out of the virus, or I can change the scene that's happening in the MC707, which means I'm changing the melodic content that's happening in the arpeggio over here. I can also bring in or take out any of these drum sounds in real time from the TR-8S. So that's quite a bit of things, that we can tweak in real time. Any of these presets here on the any of the presets, on the virus are all running through the filter. So I can filter any of these sounds in or pretty much out the whole time, right? Just by bringing the cutoff up, we can filter that sound back in. Okay, and last but not least, I've got some vocal samples in the box here. If you've seen the jam, I started it off with kind of a feel-good sample.
A true gentleman doesn't say sexist, homophobic, rude or hateful things towards anybody or towards any group.
I'm really an open-minded kind of individual, if you guys haven't figured that already. I'm really not about violence and hate and frustration, from one kind of people towards another kind of people. I'm more about the why can't we all just get along kind of mindset. And I think that the uglier and the angrier that the world gets, the more of those kind of samples you're going to be finding in my music, because that's just kind of how I am. I also needed to find some vocal samples for this set that I thought, would help me with that ebb and flow and help maybe set off some of the sections. The sample search for me for vocal samples is a really big one and can often take quite a lot of time. For this one, I got really, really lucky. I was searching, for some samples on people talking about how to be a gentleman, how to be a good guy, and I stumbled across kind of a younger kid, kind of being a goof and making kind of a parody video. And it was really funny, and I really enjoyed it. And I found these wacky samples.
By the fires of Babylonia.
Right?
By Jove.
By Jove!
In the name of Elizabeth.
Just really kind of wacky and nonsensical.
Throw the book at that.
But when I got them into the jam, it just sort of worked, and it just sort of locked the jam into where I wanted it to be. And I really like to be able to use that in the name of Elizabeth, and then just drop the kick drum. I don't know why. It's just silly. It's just fun. If you can't have fun with the music, then what's the point, right? So the vintage Yamaha SU700 is packing those drum loops and also the vocal samples that I can trigger in real time. Last thing about the SU700 that I do want to mention, though, is that it has that cool roll feature, which allows me to get that old school roll going here. Let's see here. Alright, so I can just hold the roll button down and touch a pad that I want to roll. Then I can let go of the roll button, and as long as I hold the pad, it just rolls the sound. So I love being able to use these rolls, right? Change the drum loop. 2, 3, and roll it. 1, 2, 3, let it go. The thing with the roll is that it's just a 16th note roll. I don't have a lot of control over what it's going to do. It's not like using like the RMX 1000 from Pioneer where you can go it's just really simple 16th note rolls. But I found that was really fun to be able to get in with some of these old school break beats as well. So the first jam was in the key of G minor. The second jam was in the key of F minor, which is why I'm not playing the pads melodically over that second jam, because they're not in the same key as the first jam. I think we've covered all of the. Oh, one more element that I want to discuss also. You might have noticed that I wasn't really using a lot of the features of the DJ mixer during the set. I didn't really have the need to bring in a lot of these boxes like completely in and out of the mix in that sort of a way per se. But I am using this for pretty much my favorite thing to use it for, which is just enhancing a transition. And you've got two different effects slots basically in this mixer, and you can assign any of the 4 tracks to either one of these effect slots. Now at the bottom, see if I can just bring this over a little bit. Cool. Yeah. At the bottom here, we've got a button that turns the effect slots on, or rather turns the filter on at the bottom of the effect slot, rather. And I have control over whether we're going to high pass or low pass filter the sound. And I have control over here with the big, huge, dry, wet knob as to how wet or dry I want to have the effect that I'm bringing in. Now, it's going to get loud because I'm going to play the full mix here. Okay, cool. So if I press the button here, it just turns the filter on. You're probably not going to hear that on your phone too well, but I'm high pass filtering, right, the entire mix by just bringing this button here, and I can adjust how much of that I want, or I can low pass the mix. I don't really use the low pass feature, very much. I mostly just leave the button. I mostly just leave, the high pass filter setting just right where it's going to pull the low frequencies off of the mix, but not take too much more off of the mix. And I find that this creates really nice turnarounds by removing the low frequency content from the mix and then adding a really big washy reverb to the mix and then letting go the filter right on the downbeat of the next section. So again, we're sort of building up and then we sort of let it go. Now listen to what that sounds like. We're going to count this out as well. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, and... Do you hear how the reverb sort of lifts the momentum of the track? And then when I drop the filter, it kind of lets that go. And 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do that one more time where I won't speak over it. I just find that a really nice way to sort of help the transitions sound a little bit more fleshed out and interesting. 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So at any time, I can just filter down that lead from the virus, get it out of the mix entirely, right? I can drop the kick drum. We can bring in the lows on the breakbeat. Bring up the filter on that melodic sound. We can add in the other melodic sound. We can change the scene here. So now it's playing a different, kind of melodic part on this side here. The virus is still going, so I could kind of fade that back in if I wanted to, right? Now I can just kind of let that play. Now we can change the preset on the virus. 1, 2, and change that preset now. So do you hear how the arpeggio is still going here from the MC707? I can kind of filter that to sound good with the new sound, You can kind of bring that new sound down with the filter. You can drop the lows on the breakbeat. You can hit that vocal sample and drop that kick drum. And now we're just jamming, you know? Moving the filter. We're still counting in 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, here we go. Now I've changed the scene on the MC707 and changed the preset on the virus. So we could tweak that preset on the virus a little. Filter it back here. Drop the kick. Get ready to bring the lows back in on the breakbeat. Change the drum loop. In 1, 2, and turn that drum loop back on now. And see how the groove kind of changes depending on what, you know, things are playing? Let's change it again. 1, 2, and change the virus preset now. And I've got, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 different arpeggios that are just lined up back to back here. In 1, 2, let's change the preset again. Kind of filter it up to get it in the mix, right? Then get ready for the kick drum. Let's do it. So depending on, you know, this jam is completely different from that first jam in the fact that there is no scenes to sort of where I press one button and the whole thing just kind of changes and follows along. It's really dependent on what I'm doing. And I've only got, you know, 2 hands and 2 arms. I can only change so many things at once. So it creates a much different kind of feel in the jam where I don't necessarily know where it's going to go next. And I don't necessarily, you know what's coming. And it's sort of me interacting with the jam and then the jam kind of leading me where to go sometimes as well, which is completely the opposite of that first jam where, again, where I showed you how I had the pre-programmed scenes where I press one button and then everything changes because I'm using sort of the circuit tracks as a master sequencer. There's not really a master sequencer like that set up in this second jam. It's just a master clock in that everything just kind of starts going, but I'm now using the internal sequencers on each individual device to create that jam. I'm going to check back in with the chat. I know we've gone over a lot of really technical stuff, so please feel free to ask if you guys have any questions, and we're going to move over to the modular side of things, I think. Let's see here. Okay, cool deal, you guys. All right, so let me see if I can maybe change this camera. I guess we kind of don't need to, huh? Cool deal. Get my coffee out of the shot here. Sorry about that. And maybe I'll have some. I'm really excited about this modular patch, you guys. This is my favorite Eurorack patch that I've ever made. I don't have a lot of experience working with this new case yet. This is maybe the 3rd or 4th patch that I've built, having everything kind of laid out in one spot. I spent a lot of time on this one. And let me see if I can't break down how I made it. I'm going to bring the volume up on this side. All right, cool deal. Hopefully we're not going to get too loud. Let me know if it gets too loud, you guys. I think I'll bring it down on this side one. All right. It's not really about the jam as it is so much me just chatting with you guys about it. The first thing you may notice is that I've got the same thing here that I've always got set up, which is that impact sound, and then a riser. So we've got sort of an ebb and flow happening right from the beginning. All right. Okay. So every single time that I'm just going to stand here for a moment and chat about this while the music's playing. So every single time that riser happens and the crash happens, the percussion changes as well. And you can notice that I'm not touching the system. We're going to listen to this. Listen real close here. Okay, so when that impact sound happened, we turned off the hi-hats and we turned on a ride and kind of another percussion sound. And I'm going to explain how that's all set up. Okay, so we've just dropped the ride there and brought in more hi-hats and more percussion. All right. Now I'm using the Erica Synth's Black Sequencer as the main sequencer of this particular patch, but I've also got some other sequencers that are doing some the rhythmics and stuff. I've got the Golden Shower from Mazatron, responsible here for some of my percussion rhythms and whatnot. And what I knew right off the jump is that I wanted to create that sort of an ebb and flow, like I discussed right back in the very beginning, where we get like a 16-bar ebb and flow happening, to where here's that riser coming in. Okay, so every 16 bars that rise, this patch is 150 beats per minute. I don't know why that's relevant, but that's the tempo that the riser is synced to. That's why it just kind of triggered off in my memory there. And so every 16 bars, we hear that riser, and then we hear that downbeat impact again. And that helps me stay on the grid and kind of help, make those changes when the listener's ear is going to be, expecting those changes to be. I can't stress this enough as a concept of live performing. When you're performing, your head can do all sorts of strange tricks, and maybe you lose time of the rhythm or what your focus is entirely, right? But then your audience is out there and they're really locked in with the groove that you're putting down. And if you're making pattern changes that are unexpected on like bar 5 or like bar 12 or something, it's going to like hurt it's going to mess the brains up of your audience a bit, and they're not really going to vibe that so much. You really want to stick to those anticipated changes on like sections of 4, sections of 8, and sections of 16. And so that's what that does for me. And like, I don't think, some people might think, oh, I can't have that kind of a thing going, for 20 minutes, Dean. But I certainly did. Every single jam in this set has that exact, they're the same sounds even. I mean, it's the exact same impact sound and that same, sort of like pumping noise riser that I like to use a lot. I think that helps keep a level of consistency through the jam as well, and kind of help your listener get into your groove and just know when those changes are going to happen, so they can feel the music that you're putting down. If your audience can't feel your groove, that's going to be a problem. So that's the very first thing that I set up. That to happen every 16 bars automatically, okay? And I wanted some some percussion to change magically as well, so that it will be one less thing for me to have to deal with when I'm working with this patch. Excuse me. So I've got these modules in my 1U section of this case. I don't know if I can get in here with this other camera, but we're going to see if we can. And these are from a company called Ritual Electronics, and the modules are called Pointus. And basically, what they allow me to do is create auto magic things where the tracks turn on and off in real time without me having to do anything. They basically have an input where you can put an audio signal or a trigger signal, and they have 2 different outputs. So you can send that signal to one of the 2 outputs, and every time I push this button, it changes which of those 2 outputs the sound is coming from. I can send a trigger signal that triggers this button without me having to press it. And that's how I get patterns to happen or changes to happen rather, that are just kind of programmed into the rhythm of these patches. So every 16 bars, these .2 modules receive a trigger signal. They all receive a trigger signal that changes the output of where the input signal is going. And rather than have two different destinations on these, to where maybe it goes to a high, maybe I've got a rhythm plugged in, right, a trigger rhythm, and I could have it so, you know, when it's coming out of the top output, it goes to a hi-hat sound. And when it's coming out of the bottom output rather, maybe it goes to a ride cymbal sound. But I don't have it set up that way in this patch. I don't have anything in these second outputs. So what this is doing essentially is every 16 bars, these modules are receiving a trigger signal, and it's changing which of the outputs it's sending the signal to. But I only have one thing coming out of the outputs. So it's essentially just turning the tracks on or off every 16 bars. And there's 4 of these modules that are all active at the same time. So I've got 4 different, elements of this jam that are turning on and off in real time. The other thing that I knew that I wanted to do from the very beginning was to have 2 different kick drum samples. Not samples, excuse me. I wanted to have 2 different kick drum sounds, and I specifically did not want to use samples for the kick drum because I always use samples for the kick drum. And so I wanted to do it in real time using actual modules for the kick drum, and I knew I wanted to have 2 different kick drum sounds that I could switch back and forth between, one being a little bit more tamed and one being a little bit more, you know, aggressive and out there. So let's see here. What I've got is I've got my 4 on the floor kick drum trigger just running into a dope for module, which is a quad switch module here. And it's you can run a signal into it, and then with just the flick of a switch, you decide whether it's coming out of output 1 or output 2. Same kind of deal as we're talking about up here with the .2 modules. And so you can also choose the middle section, which is nothing is coming out. And so what does that mean? That means I'm able to route a kick drum trigger signal into this module here, and then I can either route it to kick drum number 1, I can route it to kick drum number 2, or I can turn it off entirely. And let me see if I can show you what that sounds like. Right now it's turned off. I'll turn it on. Okay, fantastic. let me turn the volume up a little bit here on my master. All right, so this is a kick drum that's being generated in real time from the Hysteria module from Dreadbox. It's basically just a sine wave, and I'm using, got my percussion turning on and off in the background automatically there. I'm basically using a Blue Lantern Module's assist module to create the envelope for this kick drum to make it a really punchy kick drum. And even though I can do some adjusting on this kick drum in real time, I don't, and I just let it, exist as, I think that's a pretty robust sounding kick we've got there. And I can turn that off by just, assigning the switch to the middle position, and now the trigger signal is not going to either output. Or I can push this to the other kick drum, which is I'm considering to be like my bigger kick drum of the two. Let me show you what I mean there. Right, I can make this absolutely monstrous. And I don't think I can probably zoom in enough with the camera, so I'm not even gonna bother. But what it is a really, I'm gonna actually do a video on this specifically because I really like the sound that I'm able to get here for this big techno kick. This is actually a Pittsburgh Modular low pass gate module. And basically, I've got the resonance set all the way to the max so that it's basically self-oscillating. We've got the, it's set to low-pass gate mode, and I've got the frequency very, very low. I just send a, like a trigger signal, and that's all it takes. And the self-oscillation from the filter gives us that huge kick sound. I'm also running it through a little bit of a wave folder from Ton to get a little bit more robustness on there. But I'm definitely going to do like a specific deep dive video, like an edited video on that, on how to get that type of a sound. So I'm not going to waste your time too much on that here. But that big kick that I just love for this is so huge. And again, that's the Pittsburgh modular low pass. I mean, that kick is just a beast, right? I've got it running through this wave folder here so I can tame it. Here's if I take the wave folder all the way off. Just kind of, the wave folder is adding harmonic distortion. So sort of like more frequencies are coming through when I turn it up. And then I can make the kick just a lot bigger with this. So here it comes. Right? That's with the harmonic distortion from the Ton module from Instro Ton. That's maxed out there. So that's like just the biggest kick you can get. I mean, that's huge, right? And I can kind of tame that. I don't actually, I might even be saying that wrong. This might not be a wave folder, but I believe it is. And again, I'm going to try to do a video specifically on this kind of a thing, because I really love this kick sound. We're able to really, anything from a lower, kind of a deep house kick, to just go crazy, right? And depending on what sort of distortions or wave folders or maybe decimators or whatever I run this type of kick through, we can get some different results as well. But that's, I think, for a specific deep dive video still. You may remember I talked about being able to go back and forth between some scenes using the Novation Circuit tracks in the first jam. Basically, scenes are just, a collection of patterns or notes or sequences that when, you trigger the scene on the downbeat of the next measure, it starts all of those, patterns playing. And I have that sort of concept happening here in the Erica Synths Black Sequencer. I've got 6 different, patterns or scenes set up, and this is controlling my bass line, and it's controlling the lead synthesizer sound and a couple of the percussion sounds as well. And that's really about it. The rest of the stuff I have to do live, like turning on and off the kick drum. Let's show you guys some of these other elements that are in this patch as well real quick here. All right. So I've got some hi-hats here from the 2 HP hats module wall. I'm sure you recognize that clang. So some hi-hats there being triggered, open and closed hat pattern. It's got kind of a breakbeat chop happening in the background, right? You know, that kind of just adds a little bit of, it makes it feel like we're going faster almost when that comes in. Take it out. The break part. And I also feel that that sort of old school kind of a break being layered throughout sort of helped this jam feel like it made sense to come over the last jam, which featured those old school breaks as well. Just to kind of help tie the set together with a thread that, you know, kind of is a consistent thread between some of the jams. Again, we can change that kick drum out. So this helps with my ebb and flow as well, I think. Being able to swap between these 2 different kick drums. Because I feel like the first kick drum here is kind of mellower than that other one. 1, 2. Let's bring the big kick now. Right? I had it, I think, bigger though. Yeah, more like this. Here comes the ebb and flow. So that's happening in the background again without me having to do anything because I've set that up. So I can kind of just stand here. I can even get lost on the journey, right? Oh no, where are we? I can't, where's the 1? Where's the 4? And I just sort of wait. Here it comes. 2, 3, let's go. And I can kind of feel when that's coming, and then I can use that to know when to change the patterns. And now I'm back on the grid, right? So I can bring in, and change the kick there. So I can bring in these chords. can run these through a filter as well, which I'm going to be doing a video on. This is a new filter that I picked up for this jam specifically. It's the Moon Phase filter from Patching Panda, and it is absolutely amazing. It's a stereo filter, which is what makes it so amazing, because the majority of filters in Eurorack are mono. And it just sounds like, it's just the sound quality of this filter just blows me away. I can get really low with it, but it doesn't really break up the sound. It sounds nice still. I've got some claps that I can turn on and off in real time. Probably didn't hear that one. It's very subtle. There's two. There's a light clap and then a big clap. Oh, forget about it, Travarsi. It notches, bro. It's actually a really magic filter. I got it because I needed a stereo filter specifically to be able to run my stereo samples out of that are coming out of the assimilator sampler here. Again, that's sort of the same concept that I talked about a little bit ago with the Novation circuit tracks, and that its samples are 16-bit 44 kilohertz mono samples. So I was able to layer samples from the MPC Live over that jam that are stereo samples over those mono samples. If you've ever had to build jams, using only mono material, and then you've built some jams that are using stereo material, you really might know where I'm coming from here. But it's really nice to be able to add some stereo content, some nice, thick, rich, wide stereo content over some of your mono drum sounds and effect sounds and whatnot. And so I've got these chords that are just samples that are coming out of the assimilator here, and I just really wanted a filter that I would be able to... I mean, you can just filter them right out, and it doesn't get distorted. The resonance doesn't self-oscillate, I don't think, so it doesn't just scream and get crazy. It's just like butter. It's like a butter filter. I'm really in love with this filter, you guys. Moon Phase from Patching Panda, but there'll be a video on that coming soon at some point. And let's see here. So I've got the claps that I can bring in and out, right? Here's the light clap, and then I have a big clap so that I can, do, again, I've got like a light kick and then a big kick. I've got kind of a light clap and then a big clap. I can filter this clap sound. Oh, you need it for sure, Travarsi. You would love it. Trust me. Ask Frey Frey. Ask Frey Frey. She'll tell you. So I love being able to filter some of the percussion as well. Again, I'm filtering that big clap here. So I can kind of bring that clap down for certain sections, right? Turn the kick off, maybe breathe for a second. Then get ready for something to come happen.
Be a freak, do whatever you want.
All right. Now, you guys know I love to use, vocal samples in my tracks, in my jams and stuff to help kind of give a little bit of extra personality. And, it's hard to, like, what are you going to do a year from now if someone's like, oh, yeah, that one jam you did, that techno jam? You know what I mean? But these sort of vocal samples give my tracks some sort of an identity, Oh, that one thing you did, about being a freak, do whatever you want. Like, it gives sort of an identity to the to the jams. And I also find that people identify with stuff a lot more when you put some sort of a vocal sample that they can really identify with, especially people who, let's be face it, not everybody's into electronic music, not everybody's into techno music, and when you put those vocal samples, a lot of the non-techno heads can kind of identify a little bit more with what you're doing because it reminds them of the music that they're familiar with that has vocals and lyrics in it as well. Just something to think about. Okay, so I've also got these really big chord stabs that I can bring in and out in real time. I'm just using the mutes module from DivKid to turn those claps on and off in real time whenever I see fit. And I've got the same thing set up over here on this side. I've got 2 of these modules so that I can route things into them and switch them on and off in real time. This combination of being able to do things in real time, but also have some pre-programmed things set up inside of the sequencer that I can kind of go to on the next downbeat is what helps me keep this type of a jam feeling live and loose, you know, and not everything is completely just locked in. You need to have some things that you can do live so that your audience, you know, can get into that vibe as well and not just think that, you know, you're pressing the play button and walking away. Because let's face it, even if I spend, you know, 2 weeks or 3 weeks building this type of a jam, if I just press the play button and then kind of stand here and go, yeah, right on, and don't, you know, interact with this at all, you know, especially people who aren't into electronic music just aren't going to identify with that at all. And I find that the combination of, you know, having lots of stuff that I can do in real time and then lots of things that I know are going to be there, you know, for me to go back and forth between is really what creates the proper environment for me to actually be able to do this. I think I spent about 2 to 3 weeks building this jam. This was like pretty much all of my spare time, this set rather, not this jam, but the whole set rather, over the last 2 to 3 weeks. So like whenever I do stuff like this, my other video content goes down as well. So I'm trying to keep these weekly live streams steady and even no matter what, so that no matter what else I'm doing for Electronic Sounds or for my personal music endeavors, that I still got some sort of content coming on the channel and we can hang out and stuff. Okay, so let me show you these chord stabs that I've got that I can also bring in and out at any time, and I've got those running through the moon phase filter as well. Whoops. All right, cool. So on the downbeat now, we'll hear these chord stabs kind of happen. Okay. Turn it to tamed and kick so it'll be a little easier to hear. I'm going to switch to just 1 now because I've got 2 chord stabs that both work at the same time. We've got kind of like a harder one here. And I can filter this down. Now, 2, 3, and okay. I press the sequencer buttons over here on the downbeat of the bar, you know, of the measure before. I want the pattern to change, and then on the downbeat of the next bar, it changes that pattern. So I can turn off that chord stab. I can turn on the other chord stab. It's kind of got a different vibe to it, right? I can start filtering that down a little in real time. We could bring on the light clap. 2, 3, and kind of the light clap happening here. I could get ready to bring in that bigger clap by maybe filtering it down in advance. Let's bring it in now. There's a bigger clap. Now I could kind of filter that up as something I'm doing while the jam is playing, right? Let's change the pattern. 2, 3, and now I brought in the chord stab by changing the pattern. Now, I knew that I needed, you know, something to set off this type of a groove into a larger, you know, more aggressive kind of techno vibe. Because let's face it, this is kind of like a sped up, you know, typical Dean Dubby kind of vibe, right? This is kind of like my sound. Maybe a little faster than what I'm normally doing, right? But I wanted that big techno lead to be able to come in. And to make that lead, I'm using the Platts module. I'm using the FM synthesis model. And all I have to do is change patterns and it brings that sound in. Press it. And it didn't because I have it muted. Whoops. There it is. So that's just the Platts module, right? And I can kind of adjust that in real time as well. Tuck it back in the mix. I'm using an attenuator here to actually adjust the amount of envelope that I'm sending to the filter of that sound. So it sounds like I'm just kind of low pass filtering the sound, which is very similar in result to what I'm doing here, but I'm actually just attenuating the amount of envelope on that sound. I have a few different patterns, variations of that lead sound programmed, in fact 4 of those, so that once I bring that big lead sound in, I can kind of mess with that a little. I can bring the claps in and out. I can change what kick drum we're using, the big one or the more tamed one. I can kind of pause the kick drum in real time for the turnarounds as necessary and go back through these patterns over here. Now, when I've gone through all of those patterns, I feel like, we've gone for a few minutes in the jam, and it's kind of just a basic 4 on the floor jam. I mean, it's cool, and, things change and whatnot, but to keep it super interesting, I realized that this jam is also in the key of G minor early on, so I continued building it in the key of G minor, and that allowed me to, probably see if I can just switch over to this camera now, that allowed me to, at that one point in the jam, come back over to this side and revisit playing the keys over that jam because it's in the same key as the first jam, G minor, and that was a really, really fun thing to do, to be able to kind of like take the audience's attention away from that section. Now I'm over here, and they're all in tune with what I'm doing over here, and then we go through the aggressive techno leads, but then we wind it back down to that intro, and to keep it interesting, go back over to the other half of the room and be able to play melodic content over this. And I've got this patch with enough polyphony so that it's not just a mono patch, but I can also play chords with it. So you get that really big kind of, uplifting and feel-good sound that you don't get with just mono synths. Because I can play those, kind of mono parts as well. But then I can play those big chords with 3 fingers. I can't stress that enough. I really love Beatmaker 3, you guys, and being able to just, grab it, set the scale to whatever scale is the track you're working on, so you don't hit a wrong note, and then you're just, blissfully jamming away. And it's something, it's that whole kind of live element of the jam where things can certainly go wrong if you're not, warmed up or if you're not playing it right, but definitely, not as difficult as playing like a full keyboard live where you definitely might hit some wrong notes, Let's see here. Let's see if we can't check. Yeah, I love taking the time for the sample choices. In fact, the sample for the that really tied everything together, I think, in the Eurorack jam was this one here.
Be a freak. Do whatever you want.
I mean, you guys know that's kind of my mantra in the beginning, and I was watching a live stream from the Colorado Modular Synth Society just the other day, where they were just chatting about how to be creative with your modular and how to stay creative with your modular. And towards the end of that stream, a woman named Sonia she was asked some advice to give to people who are getting into this, and that was her advice. Just do whatever you want. Don't worry so much about whether other people like it. Do you like it? Then you're good to go. Let's do this. You know what I mean? And I'm about that kind of vibe totally. And I really just thought that tied everything together in this jam, so that when it's going and we're just rocking out, I can hit that and then just jump right into that next section. So, and then hit the button over here. It didn't do it because I've got the filter down, but just take off into that kind of techno vibe, right? And as I adjust the filter amount to the envelope, I get that sound to be a little bit more aggressive, or a lot less aggressive and more groovy. 1, 2, change it up. We change that lead. All right. I want to talk just a little bit about the routing of this particular patch. I started using the 1010 Music Blue Box as sort of my main mixer and hopefully going to be recording device for some of these jams as well. And what I've done is I've got a whole bunch of mixers in the case, and I'm routing the sounds into those mixers, and then I'm just taking like a stereo out from the mixer into the Blue Box here. So what I've got is, let me see if I can show you here. Maybe I've got some tracks muted still. Why is that? Oh, because of the on and off thing. I guess I'm not going to be able to. I've got all of my samplers working hard in this patch, and that's what I was going to try to show you guys. But some of them, because of the .2s being on or off, won't actually allow me to show you those in real time. But there's like an impact sound. This next one has a riser sound, so that won't play for a while. And then there's a ride cymbal way in the background there. Another ride. One of them's longer than the other one, so I can kind of do a little bit of back and forth. Let's see here. I'm going to check the chat for any questions. I think that's pretty much about it today. I just want to make sure that I've covered as much as possible, and that I want to answer any questions at all, whether they be, you know, Eurorack related or modular synth related or regular synth related or just music production related in general, if you guys have any questions at all. Yeah, Beatmaker 3 is amazing, and one of the neat things also about Beatmaker 3 is that it really integrates well with hardware, so that, you know, if you want to use it as like a master brain to control things, you can absolutely do that. It can, you can, you know, plug a Midi out, 5-pin Midi out, or USB Midi out from your iPad, and you can set this up to Midi control all of your hardware. In fact, you can create scenes inside of this. You can press like one button and it will change the scene on the next downbeat. I did a video on that exact thing using Beatmaker 3 with hardware, like episode 3 or 4 covers that exact process. In fact, and it's so versatile what you can do with Beatmaker 3, whether you want to, you know, do a linear DAW type of thing, whether you want to use it as like a pad instrument, how I'm using it here, or whether you want to, you know, create live jams with it, or whether you just want to use it as a MIDI controller. I honestly believe that this is the best MIDI sequencer on iPad as well, because you can get so deep with it and assign things to the individual channels, create as many different loops and patterns as you want, create up to, you know, as many scenes as you want, and then when you hit the, you know, you can just go into scenes mode here, and once you set those up, I mean, again, I've got a whole video on that specifically, but definitely you can do a lot with Beatmaker 3, a lot, you guys. And you can do a lot with those one shots. Oh boy. All right. Let's see here. So we've been going for about an hour and 40 minutes today. I think I've answered most of the questions that came up in the chat, and I think we're going to get ready to call it here. Today's actually day 4. Yeah, day 4 of the Clownfest 5-day online music festival. So I'm going to probably dig in and watch a whole bunch more performances after this stream. But I definitely want to give you guys just a second to say goodbye to each other in the chat, or ask any last minute questions if there are any. I hope that I was, you know, able to explain this okay. Sometimes it gets a little bit nerve-wracking because some of these concepts are, you know, a little bit up there in the complexity level. And it can be a little bit difficult to explain all of the inner details. but I definitely wanted to like explain things about like getting those 16 bar loops set up in the beginning, how a lot of my boxes, give me difficulty getting that set up. What I did use to get around that was the Akai MPC Live, which can do loops of any length, and also the Electron Digitact, which has a really special sequencer in it and allows me to do things to where like a sound will only play X amount of times it goes through the pattern or whatnot, so that I can create, longer loops than just a 4 bar or 8 bar loop. Because those can be really, really limiting. Is the blue box? Yes, absolutely, Trovarsi. The blue box is the main mixer in this particular patch. All of the sounds in the Eurorack are coming out of mixers and then just being routed directly into the blue box here. I meant actually to kind of hit record and play before I actually did that jam and sort of try to record the tracks as well, but it's real time and I totally forgot to do that. But maybe we'll see about like trying to get a recorded performance in before I actually unpatch the system, because boy, it took a lot of work to get all this spaghetti here, and oh my goodness, I kind of hesitant to just pull it real quick, but I need to because I have other things to do, so it is what it is. But yeah, I'm really loving the 1010 blue box, you guys, so far, especially being as though I use a lot of different hardware in here, because it accepts line level signals as well as Eurorack signals without any difficulty. So you can kind of mix and match things between it and get things recorded as well, which is really fantastic. Clear as a bell. All right. Thanks, Wall. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you very much, Tim L. I appreciate that. I really appreciate all you guys tuning in for sure to these live streams, and I just want to, create an environment that we can learn in, that's not like ego driven or, based on you guys feeling like you need to have a room full of gear to make magic happen, because you absolutely don't. This is what I do. I'm a sound designer. I play with these tools on the daily. I'm making sound banks for various instruments or sound banks for synthesizers. I've been running Electronic Sounds since 1994, so this is like my main passion. I don't even drive a car. I drive a Eurorack, friends. You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of my bag. But you definitely don't need all of this gear just to get stuff going. Even just an iPad and like a Midi controller, a laptop and a Midi controller, or even just one hardware box can get you started on doing, not only making music, but also making live jams, if that's something that you want to do, for sure. Thanks, Trovarsi. I appreciate the support, you guys. All right. So until the next time, until the next live stream. Actually, I want to speak 1 second about the next couple live streams. I'm hoping to do a live stream next Sunday where we listen to some music from my patrons and also some old tracks from me that probably shouldn't see the light of day. And we're just going to hang out as friends, listen to what some of each other have been up to. For those who might need help or direction with the music they're working on, we're going to try to give that help and direction, maybe do some positive critiques to help some people take their music to the next stage. And for those who just want to show off their music and, get some other people to listen to that, we're going to give some kudos and hopefully encourage those producers as well. So I'm hoping that my patrons can send in a few more tracks this week so we've got some stuff to listen to. But that's the intention for next Sunday's live stream. It's just sort of to hang out in general. That's weird. I just lost my camera. Oh well. And listen to some music together. Got an alarm going off on my phone. I think that's why. Anyhow. So the week after that, I think what we're going to be doing is I've got a little pod set up from 4MS Pods, like a little Eurorack pod container. And we're going to set that up next to Beatmaker 3 on the iPad and do a really simple Eurorack and iPad kind of combination and sample some sounds from like just a really tiny, simple Eurorack system into Beatmaker 3 on the iPad, I think, and have some fun with that. So I'm looking forward to these next couple of weeks of live streams. I'm really hoping that my patrons can come through and send me a couple of more tracks so we can get this next Sunday you know, all sorted out. So next Sunday, hopefully, a listening session with some patrons' music and some of my old and probably quite heinous tracks. And then the week after that, I think it's going to be that beat maker and very, very small Eurorack system. Hey, thanks very much, Connor. I appreciate that. Thanks again for tuning in, Wall and Travarsi and 10 Mil Productions. And we got Les Tutos de G. I'm saying that wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. But I really appreciate you all tuning in. Hey, what's happening? Fuma71. And until next time, thanks for watching.